What would you do if the law you trusted turned out to be the very force that destroyed your life? The air in Dry Creek hung heavy with heat and silence. It was the kind of Texas afternoon where everything felt trapped under the sun, even the flies circling inside the old rotting barn. The barn itself sat crooked beside the dusty trail, its broken boards letting in thin slivers of light that cut across the dirt floor. Inside, the sound of metal chains echoed once, then faded. A whip cracked across the room, then nothing followed. Just stillness. On a wooden platform stood a girl, barefoot and thin, her wrists locked in iron cuffs that looked older than the war that first forged them. Her name was Clara Whitfield. 17 years old. Alone. Her dress had turned mostly into dust and threads, and her eyes had lost the shine of someone who believed in tomorrow. She stood without flinching, like someone who had learned not to expect kindness. The auctioneer wiped sweat from his neck and gave a crooked grin to the small group of men gathered below. He cleared his throat and barked out his pitch. Next one, strong back, young bones, and no family asking questions. The crowd muttered. A few men stared with cold interest. Others spat into the dirt. 4 years had passed since the Union declared every man free, but in lonely corners like this one, far from proper laws and watchful eyes, slavery had simply changed its face. People were still sold, hidden, bought under new names, and Clara was just another debt someone used to fill their pockets. $5 to start, the auctioneer called. No takers? Then she's worth less than horse feed. No one spoke. Then a voice broke the silence. Calm, steady, full of authority without needing to shout. I'll pay 20. Every head turned. At the back of the barn stood Sheriff Caleb Harlo. His hat sat low over his eyes, his boots covered in trail dust. The badge on his chest caught a ray of light that made the whole crowd shift uncomfortably. The auctioneer blinked fast. 20? For her? Caleb nodded once. The gavel slammed. Sold! Clara didn't move, didn't even look up. Caleb stepped forward. His steps echoed in the wooden barn, slow and steady. When he reached her, her eyes finally lifted. They were a dull green, tired and hollow. He paused. He knew those eyes. 8 years ago, she had been a small girl riding in her father's wagon outside town. She had fallen and scraped her wrist, and he, then a young deputy, had cleaned the wound and wrapped it in cloth. Her father, Henry Whitfield, had thanked him. Henry Whitfield died when Union soldiers burned through the valley. Now here, Caleb stood again, facing the same girl. But she was no child now, and she was in chains. The auctioneer pushed her forward. She stumbled, but Caleb caught her before she hit the ground. Her skin felt hot under his hands, her breathing weak. He said her name gently. Clara. She stared through him like she was looking at a stranger. Once outside, he paid the last of his money, and they stepped into the sunlight together. Caleb walked beside his horse. Clara followed behind, the chains clinking at every step. When they were far from the barn, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small key. He knelt, unlocked the cuffs, and let the metal fall into the dirt. No one wears those in my county, he said quietly. She rubbed her wrists. The skin was red and raw. She looked up at him with hard eyes. Guess you got what you paid for, she said, her voice dry and sharp. Caleb's jaw tightened. I didn't buy you, Clara. I bought your freedom. She let out a small, bitter laugh. Freedom? That's a word men like to sell. He nodded once. Maybe, but you can ride if you want. You're not bound to me. She eyed the horizon, then his revolver, then his face. Trust didn't come easy anymore. He handed her a canteen. Water, he said. Take it. She hesitated, then took it with trembling fingers and drank until her hands steadied again. They walked without speaking. The plains around them stretched wide and empty. After a long while, Caleb spoke. Your father was a good man, he said softly. I should have done more when they came. Her jaw clenched. Everyone says that, always after it's too late. He didn't argue. By the time they reached Dry Creek, the sun had dipped low. Caleb led her into a small, weathered cabin beside the jailhouse. He opened the door. "You can rest here tonight," he said. "No one will bother you." For the next 2 days, Clara kept mostly silent. She swept the porch, fetched water, fixed whatever she could find broken. Caleb worked his patrols, wrote reports, and tried to ignore the weight sitting deep in his chest. On the third afternoon, dust rose on the long road. 3 riders approached. The lead man wore a dark coat and a silver star badge of his own. Marshal Cole. Caleb stepped forward as Cole dismounted. "Afternoon, Sheriff," Cole said with a grin. "Heard you spent your salary on live property." "Not property," Caleb answered. "A person." Cole's grin widened. "Funny thing, I recognize that girl. Her daddy was Henry Whitfield. Wasn't he hanged for treason?" Clara froze behind the fence. Caleb's voice dropped low. "That farm burned because you lit it, Cole." The air went tight. Cole stepped closer, fingers brushing the grip of his revolver. "Careful with your words, Harlo." Caleb didn't blink. Not words. Memory. Cole's eyes went cold. He took a single brass bullet from his pocket and placed it on the fence post. "A reminder," he said quietly. "Some ghosts don't stay buried." Then he rode away slowly, dust swallowing the sound of his laughter. Clara reached out and picked up the bullet. It gleamed cold in her palm. "Who was that man?" she asked. Caleb looked at the horizon. "A man who'll come back when the time is wrong." He didn't tell her everything, not yet. That night, thunder rolled in. The wind howled through the cracks of the cabin. Clara sat by the fire. Caleb cleaned his revolver, each movement slow and thoughtful. She stared into the flames. "When I was a child," she whispered, "my father told me fire can burn or it can warm. Depends on who holds it." Caleb looked up. "Your father was a wise man." She nodded. "Then why do men like him always get burned?" He didn't answer. Outside, lightning cracked across the sky, shaking the window. Inside, the storm of the past stirred again, rising like something that refused to stay silent. What do you do when the truth you've been running from finally stands right in front of you? The storm that hit Dry Creek that night rolled across the land like a broken promise, growling through the sky with thunder that shook the windows. Rain hammered the roof of the small cabin, beating so hard it sounded like it wanted to tear its way inside. Sheriff Caleb Harlo sat near the window, watching the flashes of lightning turn the town pale white, for a heartbeat at a time. His revolver rested on the table beside him, clean and loaded. Across from him, Clara Whitfield sat curled in a blanket, knees pulled close, staring at the fire as if she could find answers inside it. The bullet Marshal Cole had left sat on the table between them. It looked harmless, but it felt like a threat that hadn't finished speaking. Her voice broke the silence. "He knew my father." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Yes, he did." "You didn't tell me." Quote, "No," he said honestly, "because I didn't think you were ready to hear what I've got to say." Her eyes snapped up. "You think I haven't heard enough lies for one lifetime?" He stood slowly. His boots creaked against the floor. "Not lies, Clara. Just the kind of truth that feels like it never stops hurting." He walked across the small room. The firelight flickered across his face, making every scar and shadow look deeper. "I used to wear the same badge as Cole," he said quietly. "Back when the county was rebuilding after the war, he taught me everything: how to track, how to draw, how to fight." I followed him without question. Clara's breath caught. "You followed him?" "I was young," he said. "And Cole knew how to make a man believe he was doing the right thing." The storm thundered again, shaking the cabin. Caleb swallowed hard. "I was there the night your farm burned." Clara gasped, her fingers clutching the blanket like she needed to hold on to something solid. He kept going. "I was a deputy. Cole told us your father was hiding Union gold. Said it was treason. He ordered his men to surround the farm. I stayed back at the bottom of the hill. I didn't question anything, not until I saw the flames reach the roof." Clara's face went pale. "You watched," she whispered. He nodded, shame heavy in every breath. I watched your father try to drag your mother out of the fire. By the time I reached the house, it was too late. The fire took both of them. She stood up hard, blanket falling away. You stood there, while everything I had burned. Caleb looked at his own shaking hands. I was 25, old enough to fight, old enough to stand up to Cole. But I didn't. I was a coward. The only sound was the storm outside, roaring through the valley like all of history coming back at once. Why did you save me now? Clara asked. Her voice trembled, but her eyes were steady. He lifted his head and looked at her. Because I should have saved you then. The storm broke before dawn. By sunrise, the streets glistened with mud and scattered puddles. Caleb saddled his horse outside. The confession still weighed heavy on his shoulders. Clara stepped onto the porch. Where are you going? He cinched the saddle tight. To the ridge. Cole's men have been camping there. That bullet wasn't a warning. It was a message. I'm coming with you, she said. No, he answered quickly. If things go bad. Caleb, she said, stepping closer. I'm not hiding from the man who destroyed my family. He saw the fire in her eyes, the same fire her father once carried. Finally, he nodded. Fine, but you ride behind me, and if anything happens, you run. Deal, she said. The ridge sat 2 miles north of town. They moved quiet, keeping to the brush. Smoke curled from a small camp below. 3 horses tied near the fire, 2 men sharpening knives, and a familiar black hat sitting near the flames. Cole. Caleb crouched low. Stay here, he whispered. Clara nodded, clutching a rifle tight against her chest. But before they could get closer, a gunshot cracked. Dirt jumped near Caleb's boot. Cole's voice rose from below. No need to sneak, Sheriff. Come on down. The path's already waiting. Caleb stood slowly, hands raised. Clara hid behind the rocks. Must have taken you years to grow a conscience, Cole called. Caleb stepped closer. You burned a family alive. There was no gold, no treason, just greed. Cole smirked. We did what the war trained us to do, take what kept us alive. You call that justice? Caleb asked. I call it survival, Cole replied. Same thing you're doing by dragging that girl around like some kind of redemption. Caleb's jaw tightened. I didn't buy her. I freed her. Cole spat on the ground. That girl sees right through you. Then he stepped closer, confidence dripping from every word. You always were weak, Caleb. That's why I let you live that night. From behind the rocks, Clara's voice rang out, steady and sharp. You talk too much, Marshal. Cole turned. Clara stood tall, rifle raised. Her hands shook, but her aim did not. Well now, Cole said with a laugh. Look at you. Caleb took one small step forward. Clara, put it down. She didn't look at Caleb. Her eyes stayed locked on Cole. He killed my family. Yes, Caleb said, but if you pull that trigger, he wins. Cole smirked. Listen to your sheriff, girl. Her breath trembled, her finger tightened on the trigger. Then slowly, painfully, she lowered the rifle. Caleb moved fast. He drew, fired. The bullet hit the ground near Cole's horse, sending it rearing. Cole stumbled. Caleb lunged. They crashed into the dirt. The fight was fast and rough. Cole threw a punch that split Caleb's lip. Caleb slammed an elbow into Cole's ribs. Years of guilt fueled him. He tore the gun from Cole's hand and wrenched his arms behind him. You're under arrest, Caleb snapped. Cole laughed through bloody teeth. On what charge? Caleb pulled a leather satchel from his coat. On the charge of murder. Inside were papers, statements, names, proof. Enough to hang him twice. Clara stepped forward, breath shaky. Cole looked up at her with hate in his eyes. It's really over, she whispered. Caleb nodded. For him it is. They tied Cole to a saddle and headed back toward town. For the first time in years, Dry Creek felt like it might breathe again. Before they reached the jailhouse, Caleb turned to Clara. You don't have to stay for the trial, he said. It will be hard. Clara looked at him, her eyes softer than he'd ever seen. Maybe I'll stay. Maybe it's time I see justice done the right way. He nodded once. Inside the jailhouse, The iron door clanged shut behind Cole. Outside, the sun dipped low across the town. Clara stood beside Caleb. The air between them felt changed, lighter, and yet full of something deeper neither had words for. Caleb looked at her. "Clara." But before he could finish, a loud crack echoed across the street. A rifle shot. A shadow moved near the saloon. Clara gasped. "Caleb." He turned just as another shot rang out. Something dark and dangerous was still coming for them. What if the danger you thought was over was only the beginning? The rifle shot echoed through Dry Creek like a thunderbolt. Caleb shoved Clara behind the water trough as splinters burst from the saloon wall across the street. His heart pounded hard, and for a moment, all he heard was his own pulse and the faint ring of the shot. Another round cracked. Clara's breath hitched. "They're here." Cole's men didn't run far. Caleb peeked around the trough. A figure moved along the saloon porch, rifle in hand. Another darted behind the blacksmith's shed. More shadows gathered near the livery. The storm from the ridge had followed them straight into the heart of town. Cole was not alone. Caleb grabbed Clara's arm. "Back inside, now." They moved fast, sprinting across the muddy street as bullets sapped past their heels. Caleb kicked open the jailhouse door and slammed it behind them. The building shook from the gunfire hitting the outer walls. Deputy Turner rushed in from the back room, face pale. "Sheriff, they're all over the street." "At least 8 of them." Caleb drew a long breath. "Hold steady, we're not letting them break him out." From the cell, Cole laughed. "You think walls are going to stop what's coming? These boys aren't afraid of dying." Clara stepped toward the bars, eyes sharp. "Good. Neither are we." The mocking smile dropped from Cole's face. Outside, the gunfire paused. Silence settled across Dry Creek, the kind of silence that came before a storm or a killing. Caleb opened the rifle cabinet and tossed a shotgun to Turner. "Watch the back door, Clara." "I'm not hiding," she said quickly. He looked at her, really looked at her. She was scared, but she stood tall, strong, ready. He nodded. "Fine, stay low. Reload fast. And if the door breaks, I shoot." He grabbed her shoulder. "Only if you have no choice." The front window shattered as a rock flew through. A voice from outside called out, "Sheriff, hand over Cole, and we walk away. Refuse, and we burn this building to the ground." Caleb stepped to the broken window. Rain from the night before left the air cool and slick. 3 riders stood in the street. Their leader held a torch already lit. "You boys think fire scares me?" Caleb yelled back. "You're forgetting who you're dealing with." The leader smirked. "We ain't here for you, Harlo. We're here for the girl. Cole wants her alive. Says she's his unfinished business." Clara's stomach twisted. Caleb didn't hesitate. "You'll touch her over my dead body." A cold grin spread across the leader's face. "That can be arranged." The torch flew. Caleb fired. The torch spun midair and fell harmlessly into the mud. Gunfire erupted again. Windows exploded inward. Bullets tore through the wall behind them. Turner returned fire, shouting over the noise, "They're trying to circle!" Clara crawled across the floor and pressed her back to the wall. The jailhouse shook from the gun blasts. Her hands trembled as she loaded bullet after bullet. Caleb fired from the doorway, stepping back only when his revolver needed fresh rounds. Cole watched everything with quiet, hateful eyes. "You proud of yourself, Sheriff?" Cole taunted. "You brought this girl into a war she can't win." Caleb spun toward him. "You brought the war, Cole, not her." But Cole only grinned. "You think saving her makes you better than me? You think buying her freedom means you deserve hers?" Clara spoke before Caleb could answer. "He gave me something you never could. A choice." Cole's grin faltered. A sudden explosion rocked the jailhouse. Smoke filled the room. Clara coughed, eyes burning. Turner fell to one knee, clutching his shoulder. Caleb grabbed him and dragged him behind the counter. Footsteps thundered outside. "They're rushing the door!" Caleb shouted. He stood, bracing his boot against the wood as fists pounded and boots slammed from the other side. Clara rushed forward without thinking. She grabbed the rifle from the floor and aimed at the hinge. "Clara, wait!" The door burst open. A man rushed in with a knife raised high. Clara fired. The blast echoed. The attacker dropped. Clara's breath shook hard, but she never lowered the rifle. Caleb grabbed her arm. "You did what you had to do." The attackers outside hesitated at the shot. Caleb took the opening and charged out, firing round after round. Another man fell. The rest ran for their horses. The street erupted in chaos as riders tried to mount. Turner fired from the window. Clara stepped beside Caleb, her rifle steady now. 2 more men hit the dirt. The last rider fled down the road, disappearing behind the ridge. The street went quiet. Caleb stood still, chest rising and falling fast. Clara lowered her rifle with shaky hands. Mud soaked her boots. Smoke curled from the jailhouse. But the danger had passed. They won. Inside, Cole stared through the bars, shock crawling across his face. "You fools," he hissed. "You think this is justice? You think her father would have wanted any of this?" Quote. Clara stepped close, her voice steady. "My father wanted the truth, and he got it." Cole slammed his fist against the bars. "You'll regret this, both of you." Caleb locked the cell door, ignoring him. "We already regret enough." By sunrise, the judge arrived from the next county. People gathered in the dusty street, whispering. Clara stood tall in the courthouse room while giving her testimony. Her hands shook at first, then grew steady. Caleb watched her with quiet pride. The verdict came fast. Guilty. The sentence was death. When Cole was walked to the gallows at dusk, he looked at Caleb one last time. "You bought that girl's freedom," he spat, "but you paid for it with your soul." Caleb stepped close. "I didn't buy her, she saved herself." The lever dropped. The rope snapped tight. Dry Creek exhaled. That night, as the sun went down behind the ridge, Clara stood beside Caleb on the porch of the sheriff's office. The wind brushed against them, soft and warm. "It's over," Caleb whispered. Clara looked at him. "No, it's beginning." He frowned. "What do you mean?" She smiled, slow and gentle. "Caleb, you didn't just save my life. You gave me a place to live again." He swallowed. "Clara." "For the first time," she said softly, "I'm not afraid of what comes next." He reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. 6 months later, the schoolhouse rang with children's laughter. Clara taught them every day. Caleb kept the peace. And every evening they walked the ridge together and carved new names into the old oak tree. One word stayed carved deeper than the rest. Home. That night, under a sky full of stars, Clara stepped onto Caleb's porch with 2 cups of coffee. He looked at her with a quiet smile. "You ever think we'd end up here?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, but I'm glad we did." "You paid for me," she said softly, "and I found my freedom." He touched her cheek gently, "And I found my life." For the first time, she leaned into him. And Caleb Harlo kissed the girl he once rescued from chains. The girl who had become his wife in all but name. The girl who chose him. And Dry Creek slept peacefully that night.